What if I told you that a single decision made decades ago still shapes your paycheck today? Consider this. Every time you check your bank account or plan your monthly budget, you're unknowingly participating in a system created long before you were born. It's a system that was shaped by political decisions, economic theories, and even wars that have redefined how we approach money and financial goals. But here's the kicker. Those same forces that shape the world's financial systems are still affecting you right now. The housing crisis, the student loan debt crisis, the rise in living costs, they're all interconnected with decisions made by powerful figures and governments decades ago. And yet, we rarely stop to think about how these historical choices shape our individual financial goals. What if you could use this knowledge of history to actually make your financial goals stick? What if you understood not just how to save, but why we set financial goals in the first place? In a world where financial planning is often reduced to a set of simple steps, save 10% of your income, build an emergency fund, invest in your 401k, the real story behind how to set financial goals that stick goes much deeper than just following a checklist. The truth is, the financial systems we rely on today are the product of hundreds of years of economic shifts, wars, and policies that have shaped how we think about money, saving, and investing. Understanding the origins of our financial systems and how they evolved is key to understanding why many of us struggle to set and maintain financial goals, and how we can break free from the limitations of the systems built before us. In this video, we'll explore the hidden historical roots of financial goal setting, how those roots were shaped by both triumphs and failures, and how these developments still affect us today. By looking at past events and economic theories, we'll uncover the unseen forces that influence the way we set our financial targets, and how to make sure they actually stick in an unpredictable world. So whether you're looking to buy a house, pay off student loans, or retire comfortably, understanding the history behind financial systems can empower you to make smarter, more informed decisions and set goals that stand the test of time. Part 1. Historical Roots. The birth of modern financial systems. Let's travel back in time, back to a world where the financial systems we take for granted today were still in their infancy. At the beginning of the 20th century, most Americans didn't think much about financial goals. The notion of personal finance was in its early stages. Most people didn't have the luxury of thinking about retirement or homeownership. The majority lived on farms or worked in small shops where money was a daily necessity, not an asset to be planned for. The idea of saving for the future was often a foreign concept. If you lived in rural America, your financial goals were simple: feed your family, keep the farm running, and hope for a good harvest. In the cities, the rise of factory work had some people thinking more about stable wages, but again, long-term goals didn't have the same importance as they do today. The future was uncertain, and the focus was on surviving the present. But that all began to change with the rise of industrialization, banking systems, and the development of stock markets. Suddenly, money wasn't just something you earned, it was something you could invest in. This shift began to take hold in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Key institutions. The Federal Reserve. Established in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the banking system and prevent the kind of chaotic crashes that had previously occurred. This institution would become a central player in shaping financial systems and the goals of everyday Americans. But it wasn't until the Great Depression of 1929 that people realized how fragile these financial systems could be, and how much they needed to be protected by government policies. The Wall Street crash of 1929 wiped out millions of investors, but it wasn't just the stock market that crashed. The real devastation was economic collapse on a massive scale. Unemployment soared to 25%, and banks failed. For the average American, the very concept of financial stability seemed like a distant dream. The Great Depression and the shift in financial thinking. The Great Depression was the first moment in modern history that forced Americans to reconsider their financial goals. Before the crash, many had invested heavily in the stock market, believing that personal wealth could be built through investments. But when the market collapsed, the lessons were harsh. Key figure, John Maynard Keynes, a British economist whose ideas would come to shape the way nations responded to financial crises. Keynes argued that during economic downturns, governments had to take an active role in stabilizing the economy by stimulating demand and creating jobs. In the United States, this theory took hold during President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs. The government stepped in, creating job programs, providing financial aid, and laying the groundwork for social safety nets like Social Security. For the first time, the government recognized that financial stability was not just an individual responsibility, but also a collective one. This moment marked the birth of a new financial framework, one that wasn't just about saving or spending, but about government-managed economic growth. It was also the first time that people could plan for their future with a sense of security, a sense that the government had a role in ensuring their long-term financial well-being. The rise of mass consumerism and the American dream. As the U.S. recovered from the Depression, the economy transformed. World War II had not only restored the economy through wartime production, but also introduced new technologies that would change the way people lived. The post-war period saw the rise of mass consumerism, a world where owning a car, buying a house, and sending your children to college became the symbols of success. Key shift. In the 1950s and 60s, financial goals were no longer just about surviving or saving. They were about aspiration. The idea of the American dream took hold, which was, essentially, a set of financial goals that many people could work toward: owning a home, buying a car, and building a future for your children. It was a vision of upward mobility that was embedded in the fabric of American culture. The government also played a key role in this process. Programs like the GI Bill helped returning soldiers buy homes, sending them into the suburbs and creating the middle class. The availability of mortgages and bank loans became essential for millions of Americans who had never before considered homeownership as a real possibility. These tools were the cornerstone of a new financial culture. But as the post-war years progressed, new challenges arose. The 1970s brought economic turbulence in the form of stagflation, high inflation combined with stagnating wages. This was the first major economic crisis that challenged the financial goals of the average American. Suddenly, the idea of setting long-term financial goals, such as buying a home or saving for retirement, seemed less attainable. Inflation and rising interest rates made the future uncertain, and the idea of the American dream became harder to reach. In this section, we've set the stage by showing how financial goal setting wasn't always about wealth accumulation or long-term investments. It was shaped by the forces of history, from economic crashes to wars to government intervention. In the following parts, we'll explore how these forces evolved over time, leading us to today's modern financial landscape. Part 2, the rise, the shift. From crisis to opportunity, the post-war economic boom. The 1940s and 1950s marked a period of massive economic growth in the United States, largely fueled by the aftermath of World War II. This era, often referred to as the Golden Age of capitalism, ushered in an unprecedented era of prosperity for the American middle class. The war effort had propelled the economy into overdrive, and now, with the end of global conflict, the U.S. found itself in a dominant position to shape the future of finance and individual financial goals. Key shift. With economic stability and growth came an explosion of consumer spending. The war had created a backlog of demand for consumer goods, and after years of deprivation, Americans were eager to buy cars, appliances, and homes. All of these were now within reach of a growing middle class, thanks to increased wages and a favorable economic environment. People could now dream of home ownership and family vacations, things that had seemed unattainable during the Great Depression. It was during this time that the modern financial goal took shape. Home ownership, which had once been reserved for the wealthiest Americans, became a primary aspiration for millions. In 1944, the GI Bill, a government program that provided veterans with financial assistance for education, housing, and business, paved the way for millions of Americans to purchase homes and invest in their futures. However, this was just the beginning of a larger shift. The post-war economic boom didn't just lead to higher wages, It led to the creation of consumer credit, a concept that would completely reshape the way people set financial goals in the coming decades. By the mid-20th century, people no longer needed to wait to save for something before they bought it. The advent of consumer loans, credit cards, and later, mortgages, made it easier than ever for Americans to set financial goals based on credit rather than savings. The financial revolution of the 1970s and 1980s, uncertainty and opportunity. While the 1950s and 60s were marked by a sense of stability and economic growth, the 1970s introduced new challenges. The post-war boom had created expectations of continued prosperity, but the oil crises, the Vietnam War, and rising inflation shattered that vision. The global economy was entering a period of instability that would last for decades. This was the stagflation era, where high inflation and stagnant wages combined to create a financial environment where personal financial goals seemed almost unattainable. In this era, many Americans saw their financial goals slip away. For instance, the dream of homeownership became harder to reach as mortgage rates spiked to unprecedented levels. People began to realize that the systems they had trusted were not as stable as they once seemed. The uncertainty of the 1970s led to a greater realization. Personal financial goals could no longer rely solely on traditional income and savings. The new reality required people to adjust their expectations. But the 1980s brought a shift, one that would change the course of personal finance for the next several decades. Under President Ronald Reagan's administration, a wave of deregulation swept across the financial sector. This era was marked by tax cuts, reductions in government spending, and the easing of regulations on financial markets. The result? The birth of a new kind of finance, investment-driven growth. While the 1970s had been marked by the financial struggles of the middle class, the 1980s saw the rise of investment culture. The stock market became a more prominent player in American lives, and retirement savings took on a new shape with the introduction of the 401k and IRAs in the early 1980s. These tax-advantaged savings accounts allowed ordinary Americans to begin investing in stocks and bonds for the first time. The goal of financial security wasn't just about saving money anymore, it was about growing it through investments in the market. Turning point. The late 1980s saw the rise of financial advisors and experts who would guide people toward investment-driven goals. The idea of retirement planning took off, and individuals began to shift their focus from merely saving money to building wealth. The new financial goal wasn't just about having enough to retire, it was about investing in the right assets, growing that money, and achieving a higher standard of living. At the same time, financial institutions grew more sophisticated. The rise of mutual funds, exchange-traded funds, ETFs, and the booming real estate market provided new avenues for wealth building. The financial landscape was no longer limited to wage labor and savings accounts. It had evolved into a complex system of investment vehicles that promised to elevate the standard of living for anyone savvy enough to navigate it. The rise of globalization and the new financial paradigm. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, financial systems had undergone another massive transformation. The rise of globalization meant that financial markets were now interconnected in ways that had been unimaginable just a few decades earlier. The world's economy was now a giant network, where capital could flow freely across borders and where financial markets in New York, London, Tokyo, and other global centers affected one another in real time. This interconnectedness opened up new opportunities for growth, but also introduced new risks. Financial crises, like the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and the dot-com bubble burst of 2000, reminded people that financial markets were volatile and unpredictable. Even the most carefully laid financial plans could be thrown off course by global forces beyond anyone's control. In the early 2000s, the housing market boomed, and Americans, especially those in the middle class, took on more debt than ever before. With rising home prices and easy access to loans, many saw the dream of homeownership as an attainable goal. Yet by 2008, the housing bubble burst, leading to the worst global financial crisis since the Great Depression. The 2008 financial crisis marked a turning point in the way people viewed financial systems. It became clear that the system itself wasn't perfect, and that even well-laid financial plans could fail in an unpredictable market. For many, the dream of homeownership was shattered, and personal financial goals had to be rethought. Part 3. Modern Implications. The 2008 Financial Crisis. Rebuilding from Ruin. The 2008 financial crisis was perhaps the most significant financial event in modern history. It was not just a crisis of banks or of the stock market, but a crisis of personal financial security. Millions of people lost their homes, their savings, and their jobs. The dream of homeownership, which had become an essential part of the American dream, was no longer a guarantee. As a result, many Americans were forced to rethink their financial goals. For some, it was a wake-up call about the dangers of relying too heavily on debt and the importance of savings. For others, the crisis highlighted the need for more financial education and the creation of a more sustainable financial system. The gig economy and financial goals. In the aftermath of the crisis, the rise of the gig economy and the shift away from traditional employment created new financial challenges. Many people no longer had the stable, long-term employment they could rely on in the past. This made it more difficult to set long-term financial goals. People could no longer count on pensions or traditional benefits to help them achieve retirement or long-term savings goals. But the gig economy also created new opportunities for financial independence. With the rise of freelancing, remote work, and side hustles, many people began to set financial goals based on their ability to control their income and expenses. The idea of financial independence through entrepreneurship and smart investment became a dominant theme for millennials and Gen Zers. Part 4. The Unseen Story. The psychology of financial decision-making. Why we struggle to stick to our goals. Financial planning is often seen as a rational, data-driven process, but emotions play a crucial role. One key psychological concept that makes sticking to financial goals difficult is present bias, our tendency to prioritize immediate rewards over long-term benefits. This bias drives us to make decisions like spending money on a luxury today instead of saving for a vacation or retirement. Financial institutions know this and often exploit it, for example, offering zero-interest credit cards to encourage immediate spending. Understanding present bias helps us counteract it by setting clear, achievable milestones and focusing on short-term rewards that build toward long-term goals. The hidden influence of financial elites in policy decisions. While we believe financial systems are meritocratic, powerful elites and policymakers have a major impact on shaping our financial goals. Tax policies, for instance, have shifted over time, with the wealthy benefiting from tax cuts while wage growth for the middle class has stagnated. Deregulation, such as the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, allowed financial institutions to take higher risks, contributing to the 2008 financial crisis. These decisions created systemic barriers that make it harder for everyday Americans to reach their financial goals. As the wealth gap widened and economic opportunities became more limited for the average person. The role of financial crises in shaping our goals. Financial crises, like the 2008 collapse, reveal the fragility of financial systems. While banks and large institutions were bailed out, ordinary people lost their homes and savings. These events highlight how unpredictable and out of control financial systems can be, reminding us that no amount of planning can shield us from global economic disruptions. The 2008 crisis, in particular, forced many people to reevaluate their financial goals and diversify their strategies. While homeownership was once seen as a guarantee of financial success, the crash showed that relying on a single asset or income source is risky. Hidden costs. How financial systems benefit from our inaction. One often overlooked factor in financial goal setting is the hidden costs embedded in financial systems. From retirement funds to credit card fees, many financial institutions profit from our lack of awareness. Over time, these fees can drastically reduce wealth accumulation. One study found that hidden fees could cost the average investor up to $500,000 over a lifetime. This is where financial education and vigilance come in. The more we understand how these costs work, the better we can avoid them and make informed decisions about where and how we invest, saving more in the long run. The road to achieving financial goals is shaped by hidden forces, psychological biases, systemic policies, financial crises, and the hidden costs within the system. To set goals that stick, we must understand the bigger picture, learning not just how to save, but why our financial systems often work against us. The past may be over, but its shadow is where our money sleeps. By recognizing these unseen forces, we can reclaim control over our financial future and set goals that are sustainable, resilient, and aligned with our long-term vision.